Good morning, Sunnyvale. We'll get started in just a moment. Let's see. Good morning, everyone. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. That's done. That's done. Good morning. Welcome to my virtual weekly office hours. This week's hidden mural is, this week's mural is actually hidden away in Sunnyvale. So I thought it'd be good for the July 4th weekend with the Statue of Liberty. But it's actually a mural at a slice of New York. So this is one of the many hidden murals within Sunnyvale to a large degree. But I thought it was actually very, very cool. And pizza. So yeah, if you haven't been to a slice of New York, it's one of the better pizza places in Sunnyvale on El Camino, right in Bevmo Plaza. So a lot of people swear by that as their favorite pizza place in Sunnyvale. So if you get a chance, definitely this weekend, if you're not wanting to cook, I think that's a great way to go have a meal here in Sunnyvale. Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, welcome. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thank you for joining me again this week, and welcome to July. This is the 120th installment of my weekly office hours. So happy Friday. I hope everyone's doing well and staying healthy, enjoying the week. You know, we've now reached 837 days since the March 16th county health order in 2020 started the shelter in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. You know, over 2 years ago, I converted my weekly office hours that I had at Being Seen on Murphy Avenue into this LiveStream address, and I haven't missed a week since. People still say they enjoy hearing from their mayor each week, whether or not they're watching it live or watching it delayed by a few days, but I still enjoy these weekly addresses. You know, they gave me a chance to look at what's happened over the last week and provide you some updates and news, and answer some of your questions, give you some general words of encouragement. So thanks for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale. You know, most Fridays like today, I do this live stream and then I go to Murphy Avenue and meet with people. So if you want to meet with me, if you have issues, things you want to discuss, definitely all you need to do is email me. So if you go to larryklein.com, you can see my email address, and we can then reserve 15 minutes or 30 minutes to discuss whatever issues, whatever questions you might have. So thank you for continuing to meet with the mayor and over coffee. I think that's actually been working out really well and kicking off new efforts in the city. So it's been good from that standpoint. Let's go ahead and get started and talk about what's happened at the federal, state, county, and city level over the last 2 weeks. Last Tuesday evening, council met and we had several things. We approved 4 EV ARCs, and so these are basically solar panels and energy storage for EV charging stations. The big thing is they don't need all the undergrounding of power to go to them. So, ultimately that was actually a very positive thing. So Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and I don't know if you saw the photo on the front of the Sunnyvale Sun last week, but Sunnyvale Clean Energy basically gave us a certain amount of grant funding to install those, so that you'll start seeing those. They're going to be partially on city land, or all on city land, but some of them at public safety as we're adding to our EV fleet, the courtyard, but also, other places in the city like the library and, other city-owned property where people need to charge their EVs. So whatever we can do to encourage EVs within our city. Council adopted the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget, fee schedule, and appropriation limits, so that today is the beginning of a new fiscal year, and so it's good to actually have all that budget. Before that fiscal year begins, we need to approve that final budget, which we did last year. It's over $500 million, so it's 500 and some million. And so that was good. We're a very judicious city from a financial standpoint. We have that 10-year balanced budget and a 20-year plan, and that makes a lot of things that we do very positive as far as looking at infrastructure, looking at all the different changes from a city standpoint, and all the different things that we need to do to make sure we continue to provide services. And then we also finalize the draft housing element for 2023 to 2031. So every 10 years or so, we need to completely redo our housing element. And so this was an update based upon the new RENA requirements. So that 8-year window of basically from a state standpoint, they want us to implement or at least zone for at least about 11,000 new units. And so that's our, that basically lays out our zoning changes. It didn't include Moffett Park. It did include El Camino Real because we knew that was going to be looked at this week and going through the final definition of what housing we have on El Camino Real. But that was approved, and that needs to be passed to the California Department of Housing and Community Development, so HCD, for their review. They have 90 days to review it. At least for what we've heard around different parts of the state, they then go back and give you, okay, you need to add this, you need to make these changes. And so we'll see how their review of that goes. Ultimately, we weren't able to actually add Moffett Park because we're currently evaluating Moffett Park for conceivably 20,000 new units, but that won't be approved in time for the housing element approval. So we actually had to add a rezone program for Moffett Park to show that, yes, we are going to be adding, at least for what they needed, I think another 7,000 or 8,000 units. And so ultimately, that lays out that plan. We'll see what HCD's review is. And then last Thursday, there were several events. There was a grand opening of Madison Reed. So that's the hair care and hair color product specialist. That new location is in the Cherry Orchard. They mainly in the past have been online, but they're starting to have a lot more brick and mortar stores. So if you get a chance, go by there. They're having some specials. And then Shane Jacksite from Edward Jones had a ribbon cutting of their new offices on Murphy Avenue in the old Social Security office building. And so Edward Jones is a financial advisor, and the company's been around for over 100 or just over 100 years. They had their 100-year anniversary this year. And then they've been in Sunnyvale for years. But Shane has been a great community partner and volunteer for Sunnyvale for many years, being on the board of Sunnyvale Community Services, on the chamber. He's very active in Rotary, so it was great to go there and celebrate his contribution as well as his new location for all of his offices. And then last Thursday evening, there was a second annual Pride Night event on Murphy Avenue. And so this is done in conjunction with the city, working with the chamber, the downtown association, as well as Silicon Valley Pride. And it was actually a great event from that standpoint. There was a drag performance. There was a Mexican queer folkloric dancers that were there. It was actually pretty amazing to see. Lots of youth, lots of adults, seniors, all there to celebrate Pride Month. So it was actually a pretty fantastic event overall. I really enjoyed it. The Sunnyvale Art Club did a Pride art exhibit, basically recreating the Pride flag. So lots of celebration among Murphy Avenue, and hopefully this gets better every year. I think this will become a new tradition for the city. So happy to be there and happy to see everybody out. And then last Friday morning was the Northern California Special Olympics Torch Run. So I actually ran with our public safety team, and it's all to raise funds for Special Olympics. But this year, it was a little different than normal years. For the 25th anniversary, they had the event at Santa Clara University. And so we were the second to the last leg. It started, we picked up, normally we pick up in Santa Clara, and then go to Mountain View. This year we went from Mountain View into Santa Clara, and then Santa Clara took it into the stadium, took the torch into the stadium. So it was good to be out there with, I think, the biggest public safety team that we've ever had. So the whole SWAT team was there doing a training run, but lots of people, cheering us on. And we had a good amount of also participants and children on bikes that joined us. So it was basically as we ran along El Camino Real, and it wasn't too hot, it was still warm, but it was at least in the morning around 11 a.m. As opposed to normally when we do it, we get it when we're running from Santa Clara to Mountain View. It's in like 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. in the afternoon, the hottest parts of the day. So at least it was a little bit better as far as that's concerned. And then last weekend was also the official grand opening of Ace Hardware at the old Walgreens location on El Camino Real. And we had some people come out and cheer us on from that standpoint, but visited Ace Hardware. I visited several times over the last few months since they've had their soft opening, but it was good to actually be out there and visit the store. If you haven't had a chance, definitely it's a lot more friendlier than some of our other hardware stores. So they're ready to help and ready to assist you finding what you want in the store. And then last Sunday was the 8th International Day of, or no, was it Sunday? Was the 8th International Day of Yoga. I joined a lot of students to practice yoga postures, meditation, breathing techniques. So it was good from that standpoint. A lot of things happening in the weekends now. And then on Tuesday evening, council met. First, council approved the utility rate increases for fiscal year 2022-2023 for water, wastewater, and solid waste utilities. The recommended increases were 3% for water rates, 3% for wastewater rates, and 5% for solid waste and recycling rates. And that's that depends upon whether or not you're a business or, single family home or multifamily. So this year's estimate for monthly single family residential monthly bill increase was about $5.44 a month. And that breaks down to $4.79 in water, $1.67 in wastewater. And actually for solid waste and recycling, the majority of single family neighborhoods actually reduce their solid waste and recycling bill by $1.02. So it's actually very good from that standpoint, and a lot of that has to do with the food cycle program. Being active in the food cycle program actually reduces the costs of collecting all that garbage. But we're now rolling that out to multifamily and in businesses in a bigger way. So ultimately those rates, but those that area took like a larger brunt of the solid waste and recycling. And then from a water standpoint, we actually utilized our reserves to keep the water rates at a relatively low percent, 3% increase. And the city has a certain amount of reserves. Valley Water this year increased its rates by 9%. And next fiscal year, they're raising them by 15%. The SFPUC actually increased 0% this year, but next year will be, I think, 13.5%. So the city's lucky that we actually get our water from two different sources. One is the SFPUC, the San Francisco Utility, and then Public Utility, and then the Valley Water is our second one. So we can trade those off a little bit against each other, but we do have a certain amount of pre-buy from both of those sources. And then there's like a 2% that we get from groundwater. So ultimately those rates have to be approved again by the beginning of the fiscal year. And so those were approved on Tuesday night. And then we also, council approved the El Camino Real specific plan. And that's been more than 5 years in the making. Lots of changes and discussions. We were all ready to actually pretty much almost approve it 2 years ago at the beginning of COVID, but we actually had to put the brakes on that. How the state had changed some of the streamlining laws for housing would have basically meant that all of our basically mixed use zoning that we had along El Camino would have easily been ignored to a large degree. What the problem was with some of those streamlining changes from a state standpoint, the developers would have had to add zero retail from a housing standpoint along El Camino. And so this at least zoning made it a little bit more cohesive as far as, for one thing, setbacks and how the line of sight is from single family neighborhoods to the north or south of El Camino. But also what's really important is giving benefits and making sure that there's a certain amount of community benefits, and then making objective standards as much as possible so that it's very clear of what we're looking for when we're designing El Camino Real and what the zoning is as far as that's concerned. So lots of discussions, lots of people giving public comment. The meeting went just past midnight. So one of our later meetings, we normally don't go that late, but we actually had to postpone one or two items because ultimately it wouldn't have made sense to have public comment or actually have discussions after council and staff start to tire as far as meaningful discussions are concerned. So we postponed a discussion on polling of the property transfer tax, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. But the property transfer tax is a potential ballot measure for this November that would add additional cost when you're selling your property. And what we're looking at is only doing that for properties over 3 million. So, office buildings, apartment buildings, things of that nature. And so ultimately, it's like, we're trying to figure out additional funding from a city standpoint. There's tons of things that we aren't, unfunded projects, other things that we would like to do, and it all has to do with property tax, with where do we get our income from a city standpoint to making sure that we have a balanced budget. And so from that standpoint, we undertook a study issue, we evaluated that, and now we're getting a certain amount of polling. So that was actually being pushed to our next meeting. And then as far as this week, yesterday, after weeks of negotiations, Governor Newsom's finally signed a $308 billion budget bill. And that was after a $97.5 billion budget surplus from last year. So, the bill includes ultimately kind of trying to deal with the rising cost of inflation and gas prices. So there's about $9.5 billion given back to about 23 million Californians. So it's up to, I think, just over $1,000 per family, but most families will receive $200 to $300, I think will be the average. And that should be distributed as soon as October. I always have concerns about how those monies are distributed. We saw tons of issues as far as EDD and fraud during COVID. And so from my standpoint, hopefully the state has figured out how that money is going to be distributed. There's about in the bill about $53.9 billion in new investments for protections against climate change, extreme weather, and it's investing in fire protection and drought response. There's $2.2 billion for dealing with encampment resolutions for some of our unhoused, and the state is looking for new bridge housing to support, people going through the care court. There's $4.3 billion investment in clean and reliable energy infrastructure. So looking at solar power, looking at, wind power, whatever clean energy sources we can get. And then the state is also launching, from a safety standpoint, gun buyback programs, permanent smash and grab enforcement units, and to deal with retail theft that you hear about around the state, and then investing money to support the National Guard's drug interdiction efforts. So good from a safety standpoint. And then there's about $170 billion being applied to our educational system. So lots of positive things from the current budget. Haven't been able to go through it all yet, but that's some of the higher level things as far as that's concerned. And then as far as yesterday, I was actually in an all-day meeting for the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, so BCDC, which is one of the many IGRs that I'm appointed to, and so from a city council standpoint, we take on certain IGRs, intergovernmental responsibilities. So we're on, besides going to council meetings, we're on lots of other commissions. For me, it's ultimately as you're more active on council and being active regionally, you get invited to be on different commissions. I've recently joined BCD over the last month. And yesterday we ruled on the Howard Terminal. So this was about 40 acres that was adjacent to the Port of Oakland. And ultimately they're looking at conceivably building, the new A's stadium there, looking at additional housing there. But it wasn't a foregone conclusion. We had, I've been going through all the public testimony received before I got on the commission. There are over, I think, 1,500 public comments and letters. We had multiple, I think, over 150, 200 people speak yesterday. So it was a long day. We started at 9 a.m. and didn't finish until around 4 p.m. But ultimately, we approved removing the priority use authorization for Howard Terminal. And so that's basically the storage and where certain containers are stacked. And ultimately now there's a whole environmental impact of what the A's stadium and housing would be. And then conceivably, there's still a permit process on whether or not that would be approved. So there's multiple hurdles still as far as that project is concerned. But and ultimately, if that project doesn't move fast enough, then the primary port use authority or port use for Howard Terminal goes back to port use. So we'll see, where that goes. But it was an interesting day, to say the least, and it's been drinking from a fire hose over the last month, trying to, better go through all the previous discussions on what BCDC has been doing. So good from that standpoint. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly COVID numbers. The COVID numbers across the nation continue to kind of stabilize. From a national standpoint, we've now reached 87.3 million cases. That increased about another 600,000 or 700,000 in the last week. And then nationally, we have had over 222 million people fully vaccinated. And almost 83% of those 5 and older have at least had their first dose. So, it's actually good from that standpoint. 76% of adults are fully vaccinated nationally. And then we continue to have people die because of COVID. We've had now 1,012,000 deaths. And then from a California standpoint, we've had 9.3 million positive cases. We've seen continued increases on a daily average. We dropped slightly since last week. We have 13.8 thousand cases a day, but it's the same as last week. Pretty much it was 14,000 last week. It was 16,000 a day 2 weeks ago, but we've seen it rapidly increase up to 16, and now we're kind of stabilized at around 14,000 a day. Our positivity case rate is continuing to trend high. It's at 13% positivity, so that average on over the last 8 weeks. So it's showing that there's still a lot of people being shown positive with COVID. And from a California standpoint, we've had over 91,000 fatalities. That's another about 200 deaths in the last week. And then from a county standpoint, things are looking relatively good. We have a cumulative case count of over 382,000 cases. We've had, but we've finally reached 95% of those 18 and older fully vaccinated. We still have a few deaths. We've had 7 additional deaths in the last week. We now had 2,329 deaths, but people are getting their booster. More than 68% of those that are eligible for a booster have already received it. And, and people are getting their youngest vaccinated. I've heard from multiple parents that are happy that their children are finally getting vaccinated. I continue to do a lot of advocating on our city's behalf at the county level, at the state and federal level. If you need to get tested, there's lots of ways of getting tested. You can either do testing at home. You can go to covidtest.gov and get, we just received our 8 new COVID tests from in the mail just last week. You can go to scfreetest.org and get all the different locations around the county where you can get tests. You can, if you need to get vaccinated or your children need to get vaccinated, you can go to sccfreevax.org or to go to vaccines, vaccines.gov, and find out all the locations around the city, around the county, where you can take your child, or ultimately, if you need to get vaccinated yourself or get your booster, lots of places to do that. Let me go ahead and talk about some upcoming events. So tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, of course, is the second annual Bloom Energy Stars and Strides run and walk. So it's a 5K, 10K. It's also a kids run that happens in San Jose, right near Discovery Meadow. And ultimately, so I did that run last year. Happy to do it again this year. It's honors, of course, the healthcare workers who've worked so hard over the last 2 years, and it also raises funds for Valley Medical Foundation. So if you sign up, you also can go to Sports Basement here in Sunnyvale. That's where you pick up your bib, and you can get a discount on purchases as far as that's concerned. So happy to support, and happy to that everyone is coming to Sunnyvale to pick up their bibs. And then as far as next week, Monday, of course, is July 4th. So city and county offices will be closed. Monday morning, there are multiple July 4th parades around the area. I'll be walking with our new district assembly member, Evan Lowe, in Campbell at the Red, White, and Blue parade. And then, of course, in the evening, there's multiple fireworks shows around the South Bay. Actually got a question on that. I'll answer that in a few moments. There are several grand openings coming up over the next few months. Next Wednesday, the 6th at 6 p.m., there will be a summer music series, starts Wednesday night. So that kicks off our summer music series. So that'll be 6 p.m. on Wednesdays, mainly rock and similar sort of rock and dancing on Murphy Avenue for July and August on Wednesdays. And then Jazz and Beyond starts next Saturday, the 9th. And that'll go July and August from 6 to 8:30 p.m. Every Saturday night. So lots happening in downtown Sunnyvale. I mentioned lots of grand openings that will be happening. The only other one that I have on the calendar right now is Urban Plates. That will be opening on Monday, July 11th, so a week from Monday. And that's Urban Plates is a sandwich and salad shop, and it'll be opening up on McKinley in the City Line development a week from Monday. So come out at 10:30 a.m. for the ribbon cutting. I'm sure there'll be events all day long, but happy to see another restaurant choice here in downtown. And then as far as upcoming council meetings, our next meeting is July 12th. And that's when council will receive the property transfer tax polling results, and as we talked about earlier, and then we'll provide staff direction on next steps, and then we'll reconsider the selection of the name for the new city park located at the old Redwood, at the old AMD campus. It's the One Redwood Place location. That'll be a 6.5 acre park opening up sometime in July. So happy to look at that name. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly questions. If you have a question, got lots of questions this week, but if you have a question, just add them to the chat. And if I can actually read them, which sometimes I have issues with from a Facebook standpoint, I will go ahead and answer them. Stephen asked, please tell me who is responsible for the gravel and the bicycle lanes of Central Expressway. These patches of gravel are near the overpass at Wolf Road and elsewhere. Gravel often slows pedaling because gravel can twist the steering of bicycles when hit and even cause accidents. Yeah, so Central Expressway is considered a county route, much like El Camino Real. So you should really email Caltrans. So if you go to the Caltrans website, we are District 4, so you can go to that and report that issue. You might also just open up an Access Sunnyvale report. So if you go to sunnyvale.ca.gov, and at the top of the page, you'll see Access Sunnyvale, and you can report, a road issue, and that's, any street, whether or not it's a pothole or gravel. It's also where you report, cracked sidewalks and street lights that are out. And, city staff might be able to do a quick cleanup, or they will conceivably contact Caltrans directly. but that's always an opportunity. That's always a possibility too when you're trying to report an issue. Coco asked, I was wondering if there can be an agreement with the Washington Pool that can allow families to use the bathroom during the Sunnyvale Reads Family Fun Nights this summer. Before COVID and remodel, families could use the bathrooms whenever they were open. However, in recent weeks during Family Fun Nights, the staff at the Washington Pool said they can't let the kids use the bathroom while there are bathrooms at the other end of the playground. It's quite far for the kids to walk who need to use a bathroom break. So yeah, Coco, I followed up with city staff this week, and yes, starting last night, the restrooms were open for family fun nights, and family fun nights are an event that's happening at Washington Park for about 8 weeks. So I think there's about 5 weeks left. So that's Thursday nights at 7 p.m. in Washington Park. And there's, depending upon the week, there's magicians and puppets and, balloon art, lots of different things going on there. Lion dancers, I think, later this month. But yes, the restrooms were reopened, and staff is able to provide that to those families that are there enjoying that event. Stephen asked, why does it take 10 years, 2032, to remove parking along El Camino Real? Yeah, so it's an infrastructure cost. There's several things. First, it's an infrastructure cost standpoint. We have millions in unfunded projects that are part of our active transportation plan. About 2 years ago, we approved the active transportation plan of adding bike lanes all around the city, improving curb cuts at all the intersections so that, from a sidewalk standpoint, they're all ADA compliant. So that's, I think several $100 million overall. So as part of the El Camino Real specific plan that was approved, there were community benefits that if a developer is going to be improving a site, they'll either pay into a fund or immediately, redo the sidewalks and of course the bike lane in front of that property. But it's also going back to El Camino Real. It is a state route, so Caltrans actually does all the repaving, all this road maintenance along there. And so, from that standpoint, we try to get grants to do a certain amount of bike lanes and all that. But this would be, getting the developers to do some sort of community, ultimately community enhancement as they're rebuilding along that corridor. We would go out for grants to advocate for funding. It's not just something that we can do overnight, and it's also then working with Caltrans so that when they're doing repaving, they do the appropriate restriping. If we were going to undertake that, it would be lots of additional dollars, and getting Caltrans approval is always an issue, and dealing with their scheduling and logistics. So I do a lot of advocating for grants and funding from a city standpoint. We put in for grants. I work with our federal and state legislators to try to get additional funds and earmarks for our city. Last year we were able to get Senator Becker to do the Evelyn Trail, so $3.3 million to the trail concept from downtown Sunnyvale heading to downtown Mountain View. So that funds it to Bernardo, and currently Mountain View is looking at taking from their downtown, from Castro Street, going to downtown Sunnyvale, or to meet up. So ultimately people can have a fully separated bike path and trail along the Caltrain tracks between our two cities. And then this year it looks like, so last year was Evelyn Trail. It looks like this year from a federal standpoint we'll get $3 million. So I've been working with Congressman Khanna for our portion of the Stevens Creek Trail going from Remington to Fremont Avenue. So lots of things happening as far as that's concerned, but El Camino Real is a whole specific thing. Caltrans running it and, maintaining it and repaving it. We were actually looking at taking over the street lights so they could have better timing along El Camino Real. And one of the things that Caltrans basically said was, if you want to do that, you need to take over all risk and all liability for any accidents that happen along that corridor. And so, we did a study, and it was going to be, I think, about $3 million to $3 or $4 million to take over those traffic lights and automate them so that we could control them better. But then it was Caltrans taking, that long-term liability, which from a risk standpoint wasn't an easy sort of thing to do. Jennifer asked, is there anything we can do to stop people setting off fireworks? Pets and people can be really scared and triggered by the noise. What can we do? So, the best thing to do is report it to public safety non-emergency number. As a reminder, do not call 911 to report fireworks. 911 is for life-threatening emergencies. To report fireworks, just call 408-730-7180. And please don't call if you just hear fireworks. The number, really you need to, if you're calling dispatch, you really need to provide dispatch officers where an actual location of an incident is. So if you see people setting them off at a certain location, that's when you should be calling non-emergency number. I know there are some people that aren't following the fireworks, the no fireworks law. So no fireworks are allowed in Sunnyvale, and how frustrating it can be, but and especially how dangerous it is. It's possible serious injuries for those that are setting off those fireworks. It's stressing out our pets and our war vets, people with PTSD, and then of course it's so extremely dangerous during the dry weather and drought. We're in a major drought, and so that's one of the issues. At least I haven't heard as many fireworks as we've heard in past years, but as we get closer to July 4th, we always start hearing more fireworks all through July as far as that's concerned. And then Gary asked, and actually several people asked, Sunnyvale doesn't allow fireworks. Where can my family go to see them? So yeah, there are lots of places in the South Bay that have fireworks on Monday. So, if you want to go see fireworks, they're illegal here in Sunnyvale, but lots of July 4th fireworks shows. So Cupertino has one at 9:30 p.m., Gilroy at 9:30, Milpitas has one at 9 p.m., Mountain View has one at 8 p.m., Morgan Hill has one at 9:45 p.m., San Jose actually has two, one at Discovery Meadows downtown, and then Almond Lake Regional Park, both around 9:15. And then Santa Clara Great America, which is one of the ones that I normally go to, has one at 9:45 p.m. So there's lots of places as far as that's concerned. If you want to see fireworks and take your family there, lots of safe places for you to go watch. And then Frank asked, when is City Hall going to be done, and when is PG&E going to be hooked up so that the loud generator can finally be shut off? So good news, DPS edition is the PG&E did do their final hookup for the DPS edition earlier this week. So the generator should no longer be needed starting next week, we think. And the generator was there for all the power tools interior to as they're working on the interiors. They still, so DPS, that PG&E hookup was a lot later, was a little later than expected. So, public safety was supposed to open in July. It's now opening in, looks like late August. And then City Hall, they don't have the full hookup to City Hall. So I'm not sure if the generator you heard was for the public safety building or the City Hall building, but the hookup to City Hall still needs to be finalized. We've finalized the easement as far as that's concerned, but the final cabling actually still needs to get done. Let's see if there are Any other comments? Any other questions? Doesn't look like it as far as Facebook is concerned. So let's go ahead and wrap up. No more comments, no more questions. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for joining me again this week. These are still tumultuous times, but I want you all to know that no matter what the challenges we face, we face them together. I'm really proud of our city and how our residents have responded to the many challenges we've dealt with over the last few years. I'm really thankful that everyone who helps out in our community and shows their generosity and shows their empathy. Your actions and your attitude always make a difference. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together, and we will get through this together. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful July 4th weekend. Enjoy yourself. Enjoy the time with friends and family. Goodbye.